I recently had a problem with my heat, and of course it was on the coldest night of the winter. So I went down to the basement to look at my boiler to see if I could find out what was wrong. Here is a picture of the front of my boiler. It's a steam gas-fired boiler system. You'll notice all the components on the front, and here I show you all the components in detail. You'll notice on the left side, of course, is the sight glass, which shows you the water level in the boiler, and you'll notice that it's green because I put a boiler cleaner in there, which is supposed to eliminate the oil and boiler scale. And then at the very top is the pressure control unit, which I'll explain more about later. The pressure gauge, which tells the pressure in the system. It's currently at 0 because the boiler is not firing. And then at the lower right-hand portion is the low water cutoff. And it is designed to make sure that the boiler doesn't run out of water. Some boilers you have to fill by hand unless you have installed an automatic fill, which I have installed. And that will fill the boiler as soon as it goes below a certain level to make sure that the boiler doesn't run out of water. But that was not really the problem. The problem lies in the pigtail, which is this little circular pipe that feeds from the boiler into the gauge and the pressure control unit. And exactly what happened is that was completely plugged with boiler scale. And I'll tell you how I figured that out. I was searching and searching for the problem, why the heat didn't come up properly. And I happened to notice that the gauge was on 10 pounds, 10 psi that is, even when the boiler wasn't firing. Why that happened is because the pressure was locked in the pipe beyond the pigtail. Here's the function of the pigtail. It contains water, and then when the water experiences pressure from the boiler, that is steam pressure, it then causes pressure to be exerted on the gauge and on the boiler control unit. Now, if the pigtail is plugged up, what happens is the pressure is recorded, and then when the burner stops firing, the pressure remains because the steam, actually the pressure in the tube caused by the steam, can't go back and force the gauge to go to 0. So I happened to notice that this thing was reading 10 pounds even when the boiler wasn't firing. So the result of this is it affected the pressure control unit. Now here's the pressure control unit with the cover off. And you'll notice I have labeled down there pressure throttle down push rod. What happens is when the pressure comes up because the boiler is firing at a certain pressure, which you could set, it then activates by pushing on this switch, which then in turn causes the burner shutdown switch to throttle back the firing so that the pressure doesn't continually rise to the limit. Now what do I mean by the limit? Well, the limit is reached when the pressure becomes so high that this emergency blow-off valve is activated. If it wasn't for that blow-off valve, the boiler could possibly explode. And as a matter of fact, what did happen and called my attention even more to this problem is that I noticed there was water on the floor, and that water had come from the emergency blow-off valve being triggered because the pressure went so high. Now the reason it went so high again is because the pressure control unit couldn't back off the firing because it was plugged up by the pigtail. So of course what I had to do is take the pigtail out, and that was quite a job because as you can see here, it involved disconnecting the pressure control unit, taking the gauge off, taking all the piping off that leads to that, and then getting the pigtail out of place in order to take it over to the sink and try to clean out that the rust. And of course that was a real problem because it took like I think at least 40 minutes to finally get it cleaned out. Now what is usually done is that pigtail is just replaced, but the problem is you're not going to replace that pigtail 11 o'clock at night on a cold Saturday night. Now I was lucky enough that I did get it unplugged and I put it back in, and the boiler is now working fine. But now I look forward to the next situation where it becomes plugged up again. I'll have to go through the same procedure. So what I did is I went out and bought a new pigtail, and I didn't replace it yet, but what I did is I put on the ends of the pigtail unions. Now here's a picture of the pigtail with unions. Unions are devices that you can disconnect this unit, take it out, and replace it without having to take all the apparatus off the system. In other words, you don't have to remove the controlled unit, you don't have to remove the pressure gauge, you don't have to remove all the piping. All you have to do is loosen the unions, take this unit out, and then replace it again. And I figured what I'll do from now on is, at the end of the heating season, I'll just take this pigtail out, clean it out, which will probably be not plugged by that time, clean it out real good and put it back. And I'll do this on a yearly basis, and it won't be a problem. Now here I show you a close-up of how I plan on putting this pigtail back in with the unions rather than putting it in as I did before. So maybe you might consider this too, and it would save you a lot of problems if you happen to have this difficulty with the pigtail being plugged up. You wouldn't have to call a plumber in and spend a gazillion dollars to get this fixed, and you could also prevent the heat from going down in the middle of the night, or even worse, the blow-off valve activating and filling the basement with steam, all of which are tremendous problems. And if you just put this in with unions, you can just take it out at the end of each heating season, clean it out, put it back, and you're sure not to have that problem develop during the winter. Okay, hope it works for you. It worked for me.